So I noticed that I forgot to record the PHP lab when we were taking it on campus in the previous lecture on Teams. So this is just a quick recap on what we did in the PHP lab, and I just hope that you watch these videos before you come to the next Wednesday lab as well, because in the next Wednesday we're going to take PHP and MySQL together, right? So go to the course page and download the PHP starter code from there, and you should have this folder. It's called boilerplate, right? So extract this folder, right, via extract to this boilerplate, right? Once you extract the folder, you're gonna see that there is a week 4 folder that I've prepared for you so you can follow along. Okay, so I'm just gonna copy this folder here and go to your folder, your project directory that we have said that we are going to create from the beginning of the course. That essentially should be the course name or the course code and your name, right? So go to this folder that we have been working on from the start of the semester and just copy or paste this week 4. Okay, so this week folder has the folder called lab activities, and it has 4 activities that I wanted you to do in the previous lab. I believe that we have done the first 2 and we didn't have time to do the first or the second 2 activities. We're going to go through them all. Once you do this, we are going to take the whole project directory. So this is my whole project directory. I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to go to my PC where XAMPP were installed. In my case, I didn't change any default installation settings, and in my case, XAMPP is installed on my Windows machine on here in C on the folder XAMPP. Okay, if you are on Mac, please notice where did you install that XAMPP software, and just follow the path here. Where is XAMPP installed on your machine? Okay. Once we open this XAMPP folder, we're going to go to the htdocs and open this folder. Right, you can see that these are multiple folders that we have, or I have personally done before. Okay, so once you get to the htdocs, just paste that folder, the project folder there, and you are good to go. This is the folder where actually XAMPP gets to serve or host the pages for us. So anything that we want XAMPP to host or Apache in XAMPP to host is going to be found in this folder. Okay, once we do that, we can go now and open XAMPP from there and start the Apache server that is responsible for serving PHP files. Okay, now this is running, right? And you can check if it's running or not by just going there and say localhost, and I think by default it's running on port. I think it's running on port. Let me just check here. I think it's, yeah, it runs on port 80 by default. So I think if you just went there and did 80, it should give you the same result. Okay, so by default it's serving the dashboard page. We don't really want that route. We want the route of our PHP pages, and you might wonder, where are the PHP pages? Okay, in the folder of the project folder that we have copied inside htdocs here, this one that I've just did, right? You can see in week 4 you have lab activities and you have 4 PHP files, right? I know that you do not know the content of these files for now. If you did attend the previous lab, you would understand what is the content inside of these. But if you didn't, let's just say that we want to serve or host one of these pages. And by host I just mean that I want to see this page live here, right? I want to see Apache serving this page. Okay, so how can we, for example, get to serve act1.php? Well, just copy the path of this page, right? So let's just click here and let's take this path here, right? Starting from after the htdocs folder. Okay, so starting from the project folder name, following week 4, and following whatever folders that you have inside here. In my case, we have like 4 parents or 3 parents. This is the first parent, the second, the third, and the files of the PHP is inside the 3rd parent. So I'm just going to copy this and remove that dashboard and just copy this. And notice that by default in any URL you're going to see that the slashes are forward slashes, and forward slashes are the buttons beside your shift key on your keyboard. So I'm just going to go there and replace every backward slash with a forward slash, and please do not make any spaces in your folder names. Do not make a folder name with something like this. It's not gonna work. Okay, so knowing that we have done this, nothing is going to be served, but at least it's going to tell me that the directory of this path, it contains the following PHP file. So for example, if I want to host the first one, I'm just going to click on it like this, okay? And currently act1.php, it contains this heading here. It contains this h1 here, okay? So if you want to serve other pages, just change the name of the file that you are serving. Let's say that I want to serve act2, knowing that there is a file called act2, okay? All right. So this is how you can get to serve the pages on XAMPP, on Apache, okay? So let's go to the stage of opening the folder in Atom. So I'm just going to open Atom. I happen to have a previous window open, so we don't really we need this previous window now. So I'm just going to go to New File, New Window. Open that new window and go to Add Project Folder or Add Folders from there, right? And let me just go to the PC and let's traverse to the same place where we can find XAMPP. So in my case, it's in C, XAMPP, and here, where is it? htdocs, and this is the folder that we have just pasted. I'm just going to pick the whole folder. So I'm just going to pick the whole folder and select folder. Okay, so we have week 4 lab activities, and we have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. I'm not going to open any of these. I'm just going to create one that is really fresh. So I'm just going to say new file, and I'm going to call this illustration.php, and let's just say illustration1. You do not have to do this with me. Just keep watching what I'm doing, all right? So just to note here, any PHP file, this is really important. Any PHP file can have PHP code and can have HTML code, okay? So again, any PHP file can have PHP code written inside of it and can have HTML code written inside of it. So this is essentially, if you understand what I've just said, this is a .php. This means that it has some extra powers. It can serve both. You can write in a .php file, you can write HTML and you can write PHP. So if I can write HTML, this means that I can do the following. I can just create an HTML tag, right? So this is our standard HTML page, right? But it doesn't have the .html from before. It has the extension of .php. Why is this? Because the .php files has the powers of serving or holding HTML files or HTML code, and it can also serve PHP code, right? So if I just go to my body and just say that this is an illustration like this, and save this, and let me now go to my browser, and instead of Act 1, now I have illustration1, so I'm just going to serve this one, okay? So let's say illustration1.php. Okay, this is illustration. So that's typically the same thing, the same view that you see or that you get from any HTML document. Only difference now is it has an extension of .php, not .html, right? So why is this? Because typically in a .php file, the same approach that you are using, like here, you can write HTML and you can also write PHP. So I can just open a PHP tag, and I'm going to tell you what does this tag mean in a minute. But here we can write any PHP code that we like, right? And here I can write whatever HTML code that I like, right? And both of them are going to be served just fine. But if I did something like new file illustration1, or let's just make it illustration11.html, right? In a standard HTML page, you can only write HTML code, right? But you can go and do something like this, PHP. The browser or the editor itself is not going to recognize what you're doing. It doesn't know that there is a tag called PHP, so it cannot actually recommend anything. There is no autocomplete in this .html document. Okay, so this is the difference. So from now on, any HTML document is going to be converted to a .php file, right? The same stuff you can let me just delete this file because I don't really need it. Okay, so in any .php file, you can do whatever you want to do. You can write HTML code. You can do some styling. You can have like a style tag and write whatever CSS rules that you want, right? You can, at the end of the body here, you can have your scripts, your JavaScript. You can write whatever JavaScript that you want inside this tag, Okay, so the same stuff applies to a .php file. So I'm just going to remove all of this, and let's see how can we start writing some PHP code. Let me just remove this. To write any PHP code, you need to wrap your PHP code in some certain opening and closing tags that are specifically made for containing PHP code, right? So the same way that you write styles internally in an HTML document, you use the style tag, right? And in the same way that you internally write JavaScript contained in a tag called script here, so anything that you write here is JavaScript, anything right here is CSS, right? The same thing goes for PHP, right? So you can open a tag called PHP like this, and anything you write inside here in this area here, all of this is only PHP, right? Okay, so how is this tag formed? It goes with this syntax. I know it's a little bit weird, but this is how PHP works, okay? So it starts with a right or left caret, angle bracket, and there's a question mark, the PHP, and then write whatever you want to do. But remember, there is a closing tag, okay? So the closing tag is the same as the question mark that you have started with a right angle bracket. Okay, so let's write some PHP. And notice if I left the PHP tag like this and I went and refreshed my page, there's nothing because we haven't wrote anything. Okay, so if I opened the document of the PHP lab, this is what we will be essentially doing. We are going to write some code in the PHP portion, which happens to be the portion before the start of my HTML document, right? And we are going to write some stuff in the HTML portion. So this is the HTML portion, right? So we are going to embed PHP inside this HTML portion, okay? So I'm just going to make a comment. A comment in PHP can be done via double slashes, right? And it's the same thing in JavaScript, right? And there are multiple stuff also. You can make a comment, so this is comment 1. You can make a comment via a hashtag, right? So it's the same thing as Python, if you remember Python. So this is a comment 2. You can make multi-lines comment with a forward slash, an asterisk, and then an asterisk with another forward slash. And this is a multi-line comment, right? So you can write whatever comments that you want here. All of these are comments. Okay, multi-line comments. Okay, so this is my PHP portion. I'm just going to comment this out. So this is the PHP portion, and this is going to be my HTML portion, like that. All right. So what we are going to do is that we are going to write some code, output some stuff via PHP in this PHP portion to the screen. So we are going to see this at the top, right? Not necessarily these texts, but we are going to see some output from our PHP portion. And underneath, we are going to go to the HTML portion, and we are going to inject or embed PHP into HTML. Okay, so anything that we are going to write here is going to appear in the second portion or in the HTML portion. Okay, as you're going to see in just a moment, and I've mentioned this inside the lab, typically you will not need to output anything from PHP portion. Essentially, this PHP portion is there to process data, to handle data. Okay, so let's say that we have some data that is coming from the database. We are retrieving some data from the database. Where are this data is going to be stored in a .php file? It's going to be stored in this area, in this portion, right? So if we have the data in this portion, we can display it in the HTML portion here. We can just say, if there is a variable that holds the data in some row in the table in the database, take this data, take that row, and just put it in my HTML document. Right? So this is how we can make our HTML pages dynamic. That's the whole point. If you want to have your HTML page dynamic, you need to have some kind of code that handles whatever data that is coming from the database, so it can get rendered into our HTML document here, and we can see it in the browser. right? And by dynamic, I mean like literally any feature on any website. So if I went to YouTube, for example, right, and I wanted to search something, the minute I write something like cats, right, and you see these results, this page is dynamic, meaning that every time that you search for something, let's say something like dogs, right, so every time you search for something, you see that the results dynamically change in your page. Okay, so if you just click on Control-Shift-I, you're gonna see that all of this is just a body. This is just, everything here is just an HTML document, right? But how is this HTML document is rendering this content? Certainly this content is stored in somewhere in the database of YouTube. Who knows where this database is stored, but YouTube certainly has a database. And these videos are stored in that database. So how is this HTML document is able to render these kind of different results? The answer is, the minute that you search for something like, I don't know, dogs or cats or whatever, right? The results that are returned is stored in somewhere in this, it is stored in some portion in the HTML document, right? In our case, if we are using PHP, when we search for something in the database, right, the results is being stored in this PHP portion here, in this PHP opening and closing tags, right? So the results is stored in this port. What we are going to do using HTML is to grab these results and insert them or inject them to HTML tags in order to display them the way that you are seeing things here. Okay, so let's just continue. Let's talk about variables in PHP. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about variables. All right, variables in PHP start with a $sign and then the variable name. Right, do not make a white space. Don't say something like name. That is not going to work. All right, so you need to have the $sign followed directly with a variable name like this. And like any assignment in any language, we use the equal sign operator. Right, so whatever that I'm going to write here on the right hand side is going to be saved on the variable on the left hand side. So let's say that my name is Ahmed, and notice that this is a string, this is a data type in PHP, and this introduces us to data types in PHP. So this is the first data type here, the string, right? So strings can either be written in double quotes like this or single quotes like this. Let me just remove this and single quotes, right? I really recommend that you stick with double quotes because it has more powerful features than single quotes, right? So I'm just going to go with double quotes in this part, and let's say Control S, and this is it. This is, you have created a variable in PHP. Now any line in PHP should end with a semicolon. All right, so let's end it with a semicolon. Okay, so any line in PHP should end with a semicolon. This is kind of optional in JavaScript because by default JavaScript has something called semicolon injection. So it adds a semicolon to the end of the line whether you put it or not. If you have a semicolon by the end of the line in JavaScript, then that's good. If you don't, then JavaScript is going to inject a semicolon by the end of the line. But in PHP it doesn't work that way. You need to manually put a semicolon by the end of the line, right? So let's say that using the PHP portion here, I want to output this name, this variable. Right? So in Python, in order to print something, and this is the part where we introduce the debugging option. And by debugging, I just mean that I want to see, this is what debugging means in any of the languages. I want to see the current content of a variable. That's what debugging means, right? Because if you debug something, if there's an error, you need to debug it. You need to see what is causing the error. Maybe the error is caused because of some variable or some value in a variable. Maybe some variable should be a string. Another variable should not be a string. Maybe it needs to be an integer in order to be processed correctly. So debugging helps you with that. In Python, we used to print using the print function, right? In JavaScript, we have been introduced to console.log, right, where you see your output inside the console area here in the developer tools. You see the output in this part, right? But that's in JavaScript. In PHP, we use what's called an echo, right? There are multiple functions for printing, but let's just see the echo here. right? So this is how the echo functions look like, right? You can have the echo function starting with a parentheses and ending with a parentheses like any of the other languages, or you can just have it like this without any parentheses, but you need to make sure that there is a white space between the echo and the string or the data that you want to print, right? But notice, omitting the parentheses from the echo function is something that is special only to the echo functions, right? Any other function should need the parentheses whenever you use them or call them, all right? So let's start with printing this string here, right? And I'm just going to say Control S and refresh, right? And you're going to see that this is the string, right? This string is being printed from the PHP portion, right? And this heading, which is the h1 here, is being printed. I'm just going to remove this JavaScript thing, right? So this heading is being printed from the HTML portion of the document, okay? So if I hit the developer tools, you're going to see something really interesting. You're going to see that this is the whole body of the HTML document, and you're going to see that this is the part where we actually printed the string, right? It doesn't show the PHP. That's the beauty of it. It doesn't show any internal coding, okay? So the code, the PHP code, is kind of hidden here, right? But this is the browser way of telling you that, hey, there is some kind of an outputting happening in this portion. I don't know if you are using PHP to output this word, which is string, or using whatever language, but by the end of the day, there's something being printed in this portion, which happens to be this value. So I'm just printing this to you before we start executing the rest of the HTML document, which is the h1 and stuff like that, okay? So this is the echo. Let's say now that I want to print this name, so I can just say print, let's say my name is. Now, if you are using the double quotes have a powerful feature. So let's say that we are printing via double quotes. Okay, so this is method 1. All right. So if you are using double quotes, you can just go ahead and write the variable name, and do not say name like this, right? You need to include the $sign. This is how PHP works, right? The minute that you define a variable using double quotes, you need to stick to this. The minute that you define a variable using $sign, you need to stick to this prefix of the $sign anywhere you use this variable. Okay, so this is the first time. Okay, so it's going to tell you that my name is, and whatever value that is inside that variable. All right, and there is another method to print the content of a variable to the echo function, which is using the curly braces. Okay, and this is more powerful than the double quotes, than only using double quotes, because later on you're going to see you have arrays, and maybe we're going to have an array called names, and maybe you want to get the first element of that the first name in that array, right? So you're going to do something like this. Double quotes will not be able to print the value of that index in that array because it has limited capabilities, right? But using something like curly braces, it's going to be able to index whatever you want to index. If you want to index an array, if you want to index an associative array, the curly braces are going to handle this like a charm. So I'm just going to say echo here, and let's say we are going to wrap all of this inside curly braces. See, there's nothing different. It's just the variable name, right, or the variable here, which is called name, and I put it inside a curly braces. So let me just refresh this, and you're going to see it gives you the same result. My name is value of the variable, my name is the value inside the variable. But notice something, you have these two strings combined in one line, right? So the echo here does not work as our print function in Python, which actually goes a new line whenever you print something. And if you are thinking of using escape characters like this, it's not really going to work. So let me just try it. It's not going to work. Maybe it just added a small space here, but it's not going to work. Notice that it works here, which is really weird. It works here in our display of the HTML document in our developer tools, but in the actual rendered content of the HTML document on the browser, it doesn't really work. Okay, so if it doesn't really work on the browser, let's talk the language that the browser knows. So the browser knows, or the HTML document knows, that if you want to go a new line, you can just use the BR tag. So I'm just going to attach a BR tag before this line ends and before this line ends as well. Okay, if you refresh this, you're gonna see that now this comes in a new line, it prints and then goes a new line, and this prints and goes a new line. Okay, notice that the escape characters, which basically any character that is preceded with a backslash like this, right? It can work with certain things. Let's say that maybe you want to have your name wrapped between two double quotes. So if you did something like this, this is essentially is not going to work, right? So you can precede that double quotes here with a forward or backslash, and this is the second one. And if you run this, you're going to see that this is working. So the escape characters that work with the echo function, or generally in the PHP portion, is the backslash with a double quote, and there's also the backslash with another backslash. So let's say that your name needed to be between two backslashes. So if I did something like this and something like this and refresh, you're gonna see that now your name is between between backslashes like that. Okay, so there are certain things that work and there are certain things that doesn't. And what doesn't work is essentially the new line, right, and the tab, right? So if you want to have some I'm sorry, if you want to have a tab between, for example, your name and your other from my name is and the actual name value, doing something like this is not really going to work. And even if you put multiple spaces, this is it's not going to work, right? Because remember, this is just like HTML. In HTML, if I did something like this is an illustration, right, you're not going to see this white space. But if you want to see white spaces, we used to use what's called an HTML entity from, HTML entities from the beginning of this semester in the first lab. So to use a white space, you had something called an NBSB, which is non-breaking white spaces, I believe. I'm not really, or non-breaking spaces, yeah, with a semicolon here. So this is going to essentially make a space between this and that. So just as how HTML works, it's the same. It's the same thing for whatever gets printed. Because remember, this echo prints these values to the browser, right? And the browser only understands HTML in order to render them, right? So for the browser to be able to render white spaces, you need to talk to the browser via the language that it understands. And in this case, it's HTML that the browser understands, right? So we can just put something like this in order to have a tab. And you can see this is the smallest tab ever in the world, so you can just chain them together to have multiple white spaces. This is if you want to be having some kind of formatting that you like in your PHP portion. Okay? Now let's talk about injecting this portion or this code into the HTML document, right? So before we continue, I just want to emphasize on something. The PHP portion is only for handling data, variable definitions. What else? Handling data, variable definitions, and generally any logic. Okay, that's essentially why we need this PHP portion to begin with, right? So handling data means that if we are grabbing data from a database, we need to store that data that we have retrieved in a variable, which comes to the next part, which is defining variables, something like this. So imagine that in a variable like this, let's say at some point we are going to say results from DB, right? And in this right hand side, this is going to be the actual data retrieved from the database. So we are going to need to put this data inside a variable, right? So this is what we mean by handling data and variable definitions. And the logic part is where, what do you want to do with this data? Do you want to do some kind of processing? Let's say that data that has been coming is something like, it's a string, right? And this string has like spaces between them, or some kind of separators, like age and department, CS, something like this. And you want to process the data. You want to separate these data using the um, the commas in order to have some kind of an array that has the first element as Ahmed 23 and CS. In order to be able to give this array or to send this array or to inject this array into my HTML document. Okay, so in order to have this format changed from a string into an array, you need to do some kind of processing. In Python, we used to have a method called .split that did this for us. There is something called in PHP, it's called Explode, and Explode is actually a function, not a method, right? So this is what we mean by processing the data or having some logic happening inside this PHP portion. It's not only about retrieving data and holding them in this PHP portion. Sometimes this data that you have just retrieved needs to be processed. Maybe in order to process them, you're going to use a function, a single hand function like explode that we have just mentioned, right? Maybe you are going to use a for loop. Maybe you're going to use an if statement. So any kind of variable definitions and logic happens in this PHP portion, okay? But what usually do not happen in a PHP portion is the printing that we are writing here. We do not print anything usually in a PHP portion because, as you've seen, printing something in the, I'm just going to remove this, printing something in the PHP portion actually breaks the layout of your HTML page. It just makes things really look so awkward. So the start of the page is supposed to be from this part, from the H1. So what is this being printed beforehand? Right? This is really breaking the view of my HTML document. So this is essentially why we do not usually print anything in the PHP portion, okay? But for the purposes of getting you accustomed to writing PHP, I'm just going to echo some stuff in my PHP portion, right? Once you get comfortable with writing PHP code, we are not going to echo anything in the PHP portion, but instead we are going to inject PHP inside the HTML document and echo stuff inside the PHP portion, okay? So again, in the PHP portion, just to wrap things up, we are not going to echo anything, but for the time being, before we get to actually deal with databases, we are going to echo some stuff just for debugging purposes and to see how can we use strings, how can we concatenate things, as you're seeing here using the curly braces, right? Okay, so what we have done so far is basically output stuff in the PHP portion, right? So we are outputting things in the PHP portion, and this is your HTML, your standard HTML, right? So in your standard HTML, there is nothing related to PHP so far. So let's see how can we inject a PHP value into your HTML document, okay? So let's say instead of writing, this is an illustration, I'm just going to say my name is, right? And I'm going to have this in an H2, and now I want to have the value inside that name variable. I want to have this value here, whatever it is. So I can go here, and the same way that you have used this PHP tag to write PHP inside, you can use the same tag within the HTML document. So I can go inside this H2 document, H2 tag here, inside this tag, and I can do something like this. I can open a PHP tag like that. And notice how the PHP tag has been opened in the same line, right? So this is the opening of the PHP tag, the same as this. And this is the closing of the PHP tag, the same as this. Right? So within this PHP tag, in this area specifically, we can write whatever PHP that we want, right? So now let's say that I want to output the value of the variable name. So if I wrote something like this, meaning that I want to grab the value inside the name variable, right? And just display it inside to be substituted instead of this highlighted area here. Right? So what I mean is that I want the PHP to grab the value from this variable and to substitute it with this highlighted area. So it makes something like that, right? Behind the scenes. Okay, so this is what I essentially intend to do. Okay, so the value of the name should be in place of this PHP part, and when this value gets substituted, the h2 is going to handle it and it's going to render it as an h2 heading tag, right? So let's see how this is looking like. Okay, you're gonna see that the h2 never appeared. There's nothing. This is the first h1. So where's the h2? Basically, what you have done is that you have included the variable, but you never printed it out. So we need to say, using PHP, get this value and please just print it out. So I'm just going to say echo like that. Okay, so maybe I haven't introduced this, but if you want to echo or print the variable value only without concatenating anything to it, you can just say echo and the variable name, of course preceded with a $sign. So this is going to print the variable value. Okay, so let's go there and see how this looks like. So if we refresh, you're gonna see that this is the value returned by the result of the echo function. So the echo function is printing the value of this name, and the value of this variable is being substituted with this whole PHP tag. So it's by the end, behind the scenes, it's something like this happening here. All right, and then the h2 tag is going to handle the value returned by the echo function, and this is going to print it to the screen like that. Okay, so if I went to activity 1, I asked you to print the values of these variables. So you have 4 variables. This is a string. This is the first time we see a different data type. This is an integer, a string, a string. So you have 4 variables. In your PHP portion, you should print the following. If you looked at the document, you see that activity 1 in the PHP portion, you should be printing or echoing this line, then this line, and notice that this line, it has this department. This is just a static value, right? And this ethical hacking, this is what is stored inside the dept $sign variable, right? And this is a value from a variable, and this is a value from a variable, and this is a value from a variable, and so on. Okay, so in the PHP portion, I want you to echo this stuff. In the HTML portion, I wanted you to inject whatever value is inside these 4 variables and print them inside this HTML document. So inside the HTML document, I wanted you to create, as you're seeing here, an unordered list, right? So to create an unordered list that has 4 list tags. Each list tag should contain a PHP echo, right? So in each list tag, you should have an echo that prints the value of the first variable, an echo that prints the value of the second variable, and so on. Okay? So let me just write this really quick. Okay? So we have these 4 variables. So let's just echo them, right? So let's see. We have first course information. So I'm just going to echo course information. That's just a static string, course information. All right? And notice that you need a BR tag, so a break tag like this. Let me just add 2 because you see there's an extra new line here. Okay, so this is the second tag. Let's say echo, and let's say we are going to print department and the value inside the department variable, which is ethical hacking here. So let's say department, and here I'm just going to use the curly braces notation and say dept a back. Why did I say back? It's a BR tag, and we have here year, and we have here semester, and we have here module. So this variable is going to be year, this variable is going to be sem, and this variable is going to be module. Okay, so let me just refresh. Oh, let me just go to activity 1 first. And here you go. This is the first part of the PHP portion. Now let's take a look at the HTML portion. In the HTML portion, you need to have an unordered list. Of course, this is an h1, a static tag here. So I'm just going, yeah, it's there already. So I'm just going to create an unordered list. Okay. Inside this unordered list, we have 4 lists because we have 4 variables. Right? So I'm just going to embed the values of these variables inside here, right? So inside this list, I'm going to take this echo. I don't want to write everything again, but let me just start. Let me start with creating PHP tags here in order to be able to write some PHP. And let me copy this echo from there and put it there. Okay, and actually I can write any static values outside of the echo. Alright, I'm just going to write it from scratch because I think that you might get confused. So here I'm just going to write department, right? Notice how this is outside the PHP tag because that's just a static value. It doesn't need to have, there's nothing related to PHP here. This is just text. Inside the PHP, I can now use whatever value is inside the ethical hack, inside the department variable, this guy. So I'm just going to echo whatever value is inside. So let's echo. You can actually echo stuff like this. If you want to really use the curly braces, it's the same. So I'm going to echo the value inside department. And notice that you do not really need to write BR here because by default, the LI tags are block level elements. So once they finish, they are going to go a new line by default. Okay, so let's see how this looks like before we continue. So this is the first one. And let's say that year, and you have here semester, and finally we have module. So year is going to be the same thing from before. Okay, semicolon, year, and let's do the same stuff here, and let's print semester, and finally let's print module. Okay, let's refresh, and here you go. This is the first activity. All right, I'm just going to add a final note here regarding concatenation, or the third method to print values with generic text, right, or strings. So the third method is concatenation, right? And finally, I'm just going to talk about data types really quick, and we are going to use a function called getTypes or getType. Okay, so let's say that I have these two values. We had the variable called Ahmed. I'm just going to remove some comments from there. Let me just leave it, right? So we have the first, I'm just going to say that this is name. I'm just going to create a new variable. It's not going to harm anyone. So let's just say that this is if name, first name. And notice that I'm using camel case notation. Let's say Kareem. And we have the second name or last name, Gamal. Okay? Alright? So these are the two variables that I have. If you're using the first method to echo things, you can just say my name is, right, and using without curly braces, yes, just using the double quotes functionality, is Kareem, and L name Kamal, right? And this should work, right? If you want to use the second method, you can just wrap this up between two curly braces. Okay, and this should work as well, but let's just add some BRs. Okay, now sometimes you would need to learn about concatenation, and this is the third method, right, which is concatenating stuff. So how can we concatenate? Well, concatenation in PHP is a little bit weird. It is done via the dot operator, right? Most of the languages is using the plus sign operator, but this is using the dot operator for God knows whatever the reason is. Okay, so now we can just say something like my name is, and once you're done, I'm just going to remove this. Once you're done, make a dot here, and then the if name, another dot to concatenate the rest of the string, right? And let's say that I want a space between my first name and the second name. Another dot, alright, I know that this looks weird. L name, and finally another dot to add something like a exclamation mark or a BR, and this should give you the same result, right? But notice how my name is kind of like sticking to Karim Ganal, right? So you can just add a space there, and we are good to go. Okay, so this is the concatenation in PHP. Now I'm telling you this for a reason. First of all, let's see what are the limitation of each one. If you want to print stuff or concatenate stuff using only the double quotes, so method 1, which is double quotes only, the limitation is you cannot insert indexed values. So if we have an array and I want to get the first element, this is going to throw an error. But if you use this with curly braces, this is going to work. So we can do something like this. And if this is an array, just assuming that this is an array, I can index the first element, the second element, and so on, right? But what is the limitation of the curly brace if it's that powerful? The limitation of the curly brace, right, method 2, curly braces, is that you cannot include function calls, right? So we are going to see in the next video when we get to the part where we have an array and I want to concatenate the elements of the array. I have multiple values and I just want to concatenate all of the values together in one string. Or as we've said in Python, if you remember Python, we used to use the join function. We want to join the elements of the array to form a string, right? So we will use a function called, I'm just going to give you ahead of what we are going to see in the next video. So we are going to use a function called Implode, and Implode actually takes a variable, which is basically an array. So it takes an array like that, right? And it takes the first argument as the separator. Let's say that I want to join the array based on commas, or to join the array based on white spaces, or to join an array elements based on vertical line, like that, right? So this is what will be the implode doing, right, as you're going to see in the next video. If I included the implode like this, let's say I'm going to echo something like all values in an array is, and I use the curly brace and I put the implode, it's not going to work. It's going to throw an error, right? So bottom line is the limitation of the curly brace is that you cannot put function calls inside. And this is where you are going to need the third method, right? Which is the old school method of concatenating things in PHP using the dot operator. So if I want to concatenate stuff, I can say that, for example, this is the first portion, this is the second, and this is string, and I'm concatenating another variable. This variable can, or this value can be a function. So I can include a function call that is going to take the array, join the elements based on a separator of a vertical line, return the result as a string in this highlighted area here, and continue your life on with concatenating the rest of the string that you want to print. So in concatenation, this totally works, but using something like curly braces, calling functions within the curly brace is not going to work with you, okay? So let's talk about the data types. So far we just have seen the strings, right? And as well there are numbers. In JavaScript, a number represents an integer or a float, right? In PHP you have integers, you have floats, you have booleans, and you have arrays, okay? So let me just really quick do something like, let's say string str, and I'm going to say this is a string, and let's say that we have a flag, just this is just the name of a variable. I'm going to include true here, and let's say that we have integer, right, integer, and I'm going to put something like this, and let's say that we have a float, so 3.14, and let's say that we have an array. I know that you haven't seen an array, but I'm just going to include it for now. So an array, or a list as we have been used to call it in Python, is just a brackets like this and put some values there, separated of course by commas, right? You can have mixed types of values. So you can have numbers, floats, you can have booleans. It's not going to tell you anything wrong. And finally, we have associative arrays. So I'm not going to write associative arrays here, so I'm just going to stick to these. So let's say that we are going to use the echo function. Okay, and I'm going to echo the value of the variable str. So let's talk about the first data type, which is string. Okay, so I want to include the variable str, right? So this is the value string. Let's just say that the value, and let's say that we have the type here. And notice this, whenever I use the function called getType, and this is what I was mentioning, if I use getType, right, and I send that variable there, let's add a BR here, right, it's gonna throw an error. So let's take a look here. Where is it? Okay, this is our script, and let's go to the browser. And notice how it returns, or it prints getType as if it's a static string. This is not what you want. You want to call getType in order to see whatever value is inside str and just tell me what is the type of that value, right? So curly braces are not going to be sufficient for this, okay? So instead, we are going to finish that variable there, okay? So this is the first, finish that string there, have a dot here, and then let's say that we are going to call getType in this part, and just I'm going to send the same variable str and start concatenate this with another part of the string just to go a new line like this. And here you go, it tells you that the first type is string, right? I'm going to comment out all of these echoes because we want to see the output on a clean sheet. So this is the first value, this is the value, and this is the type, right? Let's just add a space right there, and let's continue and copy this multiple times. So this is str, and this is flag, so this should be a boolean, and this should be integer, and we have float, so this is by, right, and we have an array. Okay, I'm not going to type the value of an array because this is not gonna work, right? You cannot print an array like this using the echo. The echo is really weak. It cannot print multiple valued variables, right? So multiple valued containers like arrays and associative arrays cannot be contained within the echo, cannot be printed via the echo function, right? And the curly braces is not going to do you any good with that. In order to print the values of an array, we need something called a print r function, and it's the same as the echo. It's a function that is used to print stuff, right? But it has some powerful features that it can print arrays or multi-value data structures, or let's say associative arrays, in a, and that's the most important part, readable manner, right? In a readable manner, since the R here. Okay, so I'm just going to say that I will print this array. Let's just hold this for a minute and see how these are looking like. So this is the value string, and this is, notice how it prints the true as 1 because you have true 1 and false 0, and this is integer, and this is a float. In PHP they consider floats, or they represent floats as double. A double is just a float that has a bigger size in memory than the float. So they are essentially the same thing. Okay, so in order to print this array, I'm just going to use the print r. Okay, because let me just show you what is going to happen if I try to echo the array using the echo function. So I'm just going to say print that array. It's going to tell you the echo by default needs a string to print, and this array cannot be converted into a string, even if you did something like this, even if you include this in a curly brace like that. It will not be able to be converted into a string. So it's going to tell you that array conversion to string is not possible via the echo function, right? So instead of using the echo to print an array, I'm just going to use the actual function that can print big data structures, which is print or. So I'm just going to print that array like this, and let's see how this is looking like. All right, so this is how an array looking like. It looks really weird, I know, but let's just take it step by step. So the first element, this is Ahmed, okay? So the first element, index 0, like any start of any array, index 0, 1, 2, 3, and false, and 4, okay? Let me just remove this false and make it something. Let me just make it 4 elements. This is enough. So let's refresh, and we have 4 elements. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so the first element, which is at index 0, notice how this is being displayed. It tells you that this is an array. This is how PHP is representing arrays. So the first element at index 0 has the value of Ahmed, right? And the second element at index 1 has the value of Muhammad. And the third element at index 2 has the value of 13. And the fourth element at index 3 has the value of 1.3. Right? So this is an array. Okay? Now let's just make an echo, because the print R has the same deficiency of the echo, that it does not go a new line. So I'm just going to make a new line like this, right? And once we are satisfied, or actually, you know what? I'm just going to remove this, and I'm going to say, this is going to be interesting. I'm just going to say echo, right? And let's say that value, right? And I'm not going to go to a new line, because I want the array to be seemingly concatenated to the value part here, right? And I'm going to say, I'm going to remove this value, and I'm just going to leave the type, a space before the type like this. Well, let's see how this is looking like. Okay, so I did this in multiple print statements just to give you the idea here. So the value that has printed on the first line, I did not go a new line, right? So this is the print. And the second print statement is printing the array. So this is the array, right? And we haven't went to a new line, so we are still on the same line. And then we are echoing starting comma and type and the rest of this string, comma and type and the rest of the string. So get type tells you that the array that you have stored in the variable that we have called array, you can call it anything, okay? Its type is an array, and it's a default type in PHP. It's a data structure in PHP, okay? So these are essentially the data types that you have. I just wanted you to see how things are looking like, and why do we need to learn about concatenation, okay? Because some stuff, like in a manner like this, or in a case scenario where you need to call a function within a string that you are printing, you will need to concatenate. This is not going to work inside your normal curly braces, okay?